So just to recapitulate for a second, Jacob has become very wealthy. He has wives and children. And as we saw at the beginning of chapter 31, where we are, Jacob senses, first of all, that his Laban's sons are mumbling that he has stolen everything that, or has taken everything that belongs to their father, and has built himself up, and that Laban's face is not what it was towards him in the past. So he realizes that things are not going to go well. And at this very opportune moment, we're now at verse 3, God appears. He appears to Jacob and he says, Shuv el eretz avotecha, ulemoladcha ve'eyeh imach. So go back. Go back to the land of your fathers where you were born. This is the first time that the land of Canaan is referred to as the land of Jacob's fathers. And by extension, of course, the land of our fathers. So go back there, and he says, God says, and I will be with you. Right? So this is that reassurance. And so what does Jacob do? First of all, he senses things are not good, and then he gets this reassurance from God. And so he sends for and calls Rachel and Leah to the field where he is working as a shepherd. He's a good distance away, and so he needs to have them called. And if you'll note, he calls Rachel and Leah. And the text here mentions Rachel before Leah, even though Leah is the oldest. And we talked about this before. The text seems to have, she is the favored wife, of course, the one that he really wanted to marry. And it is perhaps because of this particular reference that later on Rachel is always mentioned before Leah, so that, for example, at the Friday night table where parents bless their daughters, may God make you like Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel, and Leah, not Leah and Rachel. At any rate, he calls them there, and he says to them, I see that your father's face towards me is not as it was in the past, but the God of my father has been with me. And as you know, I have served your father with all my might. So he says, I've given everything to serve your father, and he's cheated me time and again, changing my wages. And the Hebrew is aseret monim, 10 different times. God, however, would not let him do me harm. So God has been with me, and your father, as you know, I've done everything that I could do, and God would not let him do me harm. So even though he kept changing my wages, God said, the speckled will be your wages. If Laban said, the speckled will be your wages, then all the flocks would drop speckled young. If he said, the streaked will be your wages, then the flocks would drop streaked young. All right. God has taken away your father's livestock and given it to me. So Jacob makes no mention here of his particular way of assuring this, with these rods that would be by the watering trough for the sheep and the goats. But all that, he says, regardless of the method, it all comes from God. In other words, I didn't steal those flocks. He tried to steal from me, and God ensured that indeed his flocks have become mine. And now he gives a specific statement here in verse 10. Once at the mating time of the flocks, I saw in a dream the he-goats mating with the flock were streaked and speckled and molted. And the dream, an angel of God said to me, Jacob, and I answered, Hineni. Again, we get this formula again and again in Genesis. And he says, Note well that all the he-goats which are mating in the flock are streaked, speckled, and molted, for I have noted all that Laban has been doing to you. Right? So he says, look at that. Look what's happening. And it's coming from God, because God has noted everything that Laban has done to him. And now this angel identifies himself as the God of Beit El, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow. So the vow is being reminded of the vow. We have a sense that this is now coming full circle. Jacob left home, he fled from home, and in the wilderness, he erected this pillar, anointed it, and made a vow. And now he's being reminded of that as he's going to flee not from his brother, but now from his uncle. So he explains all of this to his wives. And it's striking, he's essentially asking them for permission. He's laying out the case, why he wants to leave, but he's not just doing it. And this ordinarily would be a request he would make to his father-in-law. We saw that with Abraham's servants and Rebekah. He asks to be sent on his way. He's not asking his father-in-law. He knows what happens when he asks his father-in-law. He gets entrapped there. But out of respect to his wives, he asks them, and they answer him very clearly. And they say, have we still a share in the inheritance in our father's house? He says, he has treated us as outsiders, nochriot. A nochri is an outsider. He hasn't treated us like family. He hasn't treated us like daughters, right? And he has sold us and used our purchase price. So sold them in the sense that Jacob gave labor in order to marry them, right? So this is the bride price. Ordinarily, it would have been paid in money, but here it was paid in labor. But that the bride price in ancient traditions remained with part of it, remained with the bride. She got to keep it. It was a protection for her. Part of it was given to the father as a compensation for having raised her to this moment so that she could be available to be married. But part of it was customarily given to her by the father so that she would have some independent wealth in the relationship. And this is true later on also, and it's true in Jewish tradition, where the bride is given money when she comes in, and it's her money. He can't touch it. Within their marriage, according to Jewish marital traditions, if she works and earns money in the marriage, the money belongs to her husband. And he is the one who uses it. He's taking care of all of her needs, and whatever her labor is goes to her. But she always had some personal money. Here, Laban's daughters are saying, he didn't give us that. He took all of your labor, he amassed wealth through it, and we saw nothing. So you get a sense here of bitterness, and truly all the wealth that God has taken from our father actually belongs to us and our children, right? Because we were entitled. So they say at the end, and now do what God has told you to do, right? Everything that God said you should do. So immediately, Jacob puts his children and his wives on camels and drives out all the livestock and all the wealth that he has. So he's getting out of town and doing it extreme. Once they say okay, without any kind of hesitation, and it's all the livestock that he had acquired in Padam Aram, and he is heading to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Striking that he's going back to his father here, not his mother. Not to say that he doesn't care about his mother, but there's been a shift during all of this time, whereas he was perhaps resentful of the fact that Esau was the favored son. Now, when he thinks back about going home, he is going back to his father. And it didn't need to say that, right? It could just say, and go back to the land of Canaan. So I think there is something being said here. Okay. Meanwhile, Laban had gone to shear his sheep. So sheep shearing was a big deal in the ancient world. There are documents that exist which refer to it. A huge number of men would be summoned, hundreds of men, according to some documents, 300, 400 men would come. Sheep shearing would last several days, and then there would be a great feasting at the end. So the fact that Laban is shearing his sheep really makes it an opportune moment for Jacob to steal away. And then at that moment, just as they're about to leave, we get this statement that Rachel stole her father's household idols, which is, of course, troubling and problematic. I want to open it up for a moment just in case people have questions or comments, and then I will go on, talk a bit about these household idols. Anything at all about this moment when they are leaving, going out? Anybody? Okay.
Rabbi, what page are we on?
Sure. We're in chapter 31. We are at verse 19, page 182. 180. Anything else? Okay. So Sandy, unfortunately, is not with us. She had somebody broke into her computer, and because I know by this point, at least she'd have two questions. She always does, and which are very welcome. At any rate, we're going back. So, why does she steal these household trophiim? What are trophiim? It seems that they are small objects. In some, at least we, given archaeological evidence from other ancient Near culture, they're little images of gods. If you go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and you go to the archaeological section, you'll see lots of them. They're little Canaanite gods. They were household items. They were meant, it seems, to give protection to the house. It's odd in a way because we have something that, at least in some ways, we think about as protection, and that is the mezuzah, right? So we don't use idols anymore. We certainly wouldn't. But that idea, that on the mezuzah, on the back of it, it says Shaddai, right? Which is one of God's names. We've seen that. But it also is an acronym for Shomer Delatot Israel, the guardian of the doorways of Israel. And there is a sense, perhaps, that there is some protective value. although the primary focus of the mezuzah is to remind us as we come in and we go out, right, of God's presence and our obligations to God. At any rate, the Trophim seem to have served this kind of purpose. Now, what do they mean to Rachel? Is she an idolater? Does she believe she a monotheist? Is she taking them simply as a symbol of the house? There's an interesting comment. One of the classic commentators says that one of the things that Trophim were used for was divination, that you could use them to learn things, and the suggestion therefore is made that she's taking away his GPS, right? That somehow Laban would be able to pursue them and find them using these Trophim. He pursues them and finds them anyway. So I'm not sure I buy that. We'll hold in suspension this question of whether she believes as we'll continue. And it says Jacob kept Laban in the dark, not telling him that he was fleeing. But the Hebrew, if you look at verse 20, for keeping him in the dark, V'yignov Yaakov et lev Lavan. He stole his heart. And remember, the lev, the heart, is really the seat of the mind. So he deceived him. Lavan, who had been deceiving him all these years, and now he is deceived. And I think that this statement, after all, wasn't necessary. Right? We know what happened. Nonetheless, he didn't tell him. He fled with all he had, and he was across the Euphrates and heading to the hill country of Gilead. Okay, now we're going to jump to Laban, see where things are with him. Verse 22. On the third day, and in the Torah in general, the third day is significant, right? Abraham and Isaac walked together for 3 days, for example, in the wilderness as they come to Mount Moriah. The third day, he's told, and he takes his kinsmen with him and pursues a distance of 7 days, catching up with Jacob in the hill country. So remember that Jacob had all these flocks. He was traveling by camel. He couldn't move very fast. And so Laban doesn't have any of that. And the other thing he has, it says he takes his kinsmen. But remember the picture of what happens at sheep shearing. There are hundreds of men, right? So one has a sense that he's pursuing with a large force. And at that point, God appears to Laban in a dream. And this dream, and we've seen this before, and this is obviously a dream of protection. This is, again, the proof that God is with Jacob. And he comes to him in a dream at night. That night before, he is about to go after Jacob, being in the area. And he says, be careful of doing anything or attempting anything with Jacob, good or bad. So good or bad is what's called a hendiates. They're two opposite expressions which are meant to encompass everything. You'll see references to heaven and earth, right? Heaven and earth meaning everything. There isn't anything that isn't either heaven or earth. Here too, don't do anything. That's the sense of it, and that's how it's translated here. And now Laban overtakes Jacob. Jacob had pitched his tent in the height, And Laban and his kinsmen encamped in the hill country. And now Laban comes to Jacob and he accuses him. He says to him, "You have deceived me." Again, same language, "You've stolen my heart. And you have carried off my daughters like captives to the sword." So first, two things. First of all, the Hebrew here, where it says you have carried them off, he says, where is it here? V'tinaheg et benotai. You know what a nakhag is? It's a driver, right? You have driven off my daughters. The image here is of cattle, right? You like the flocks, you've driven them off. Not a very complimentary thing to be saying when he talks about his daughters. And you've taken them like captives. Well, it's hard to imagine what do soldiers do with captives? They rape them. Right? These are his wives. So the language that Laban is using here is extremely provocative. And it comes from this sense that of entitlement. You're mistreating what is mine. You have no right to them. And we're going to see that come back again a bit later. So he says, why did you run away and steal my daughters from me? I would have sent you off with festive music, with timbrel and lyre. He says, I would have made a party for you, right? And he said, Besimcha, I would have sent you in joy. We know that nothing is further from the truth. We just saw the references he made to them as captives and so on. And so this is classic Laban accusing Jacob of ingratitude and worse, that you didn't even let me kiss my sons and daughters. Here, of course, sons means grandchildren. So this was a foolish thing for you to do, right? So he says, and it was a foolish thing for you to do, and I had it in my power to do you harm. I could hurt you. And here I think we have a reference to all these men that he came and probably intended to, but he says, I didn't do it because the God of your father said to me last night, beware of attempting anything with Jacob, good or bad. Very well. You had to leave because you were longing for your father's house. This is putting a nice face on it. It wasn't because of me. It wasn't because of the way I mistreated you. You missed home. I understand, he says. But why did you steal my gods? Okay, but why did you do this thing to me? And here we see that, again, the importance of these trophim. And Jacob answers Laban, saying, he says, I was afraid. I thought you would take your daughters from me by force, but anyone with whom you find your gods shall not remain alive. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have of yours and take it. And here the narrator, in case we missed the point, says, Jacob, of course, did not know that Rachel had stolen. So he's outraged. What do you mean? I don't have them. You go look. You won't find him. So Laban goes into Jacob's tent and Leah's and the tents of the two maidservants, but he does not find them. So you get the sense of him rummaging around. He leaves Leah's tent and enters Rachel's tent. Meanwhile, Rachel had there, she's the last one, so she has time. Rachel had taken the idols and placed them in the camel cushion and sat on them. So if you had any doubts about whether Rachel held these as deities and in awe, this ends those doubts. She's sitting on them. This is not the way you treat your household idols. And in fact, you should be very concerned about the consequences to you of this kind of disrespect. And so we don't really know why she took them. But it seems clear that she didn't take them because she wanted to use them as objects of worship. And she sits on them, and Jacob goes around her tent. He doesn't find it because she said to her father, "Let not my Lord take it amiss if I can't stand before you. The period of women is upon me." Right? So, of course, there is a sense, she's saying this. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But also the image of menstrual blood, which is viewed in antiquity as a source of tumah, a source of impurity, something that you had to purify yourself of before you could go into the temple, right? So this image of her, how could she possibly, in that state, be sitting on the household idols? And so Laban gives up. And now Jacob is really mad. Right? So he becomes intense and he takes up his grievance with Laban, and he says to Laban, "Mehatati, what was my crime? What was my guilt that you should pursue me? You rummaged through all my things. What have you found of your household idols? Set it here before my kinsmen, and you let them decide," right? It's a showdown. Show me. And then you get this sense of bitterness. These 20 years I have spent in your service, 7 years for one wife, 7 years for the other wife, and now another 6+ years working as the herdsman. Your ewes and your she-goats never miscarried, nor did I feast on rams from your flock. I was an extremely good shepherd. I took care of the animals. I didn't take them for me. I didn't eat one. That which was torn by beasts, I never brought to you. It's an interesting statement. And to provide a context for that statement, I want to just look for a moment at something in the book of Exodus. This is Exodus 22:12. No need to look it up. I'm just going to read it. This takes place right after the giving of the Ten Commandments. It's in Parshat Mishpatim. The Ten Commandments were a preamble, really, to the rest of the law code, which we find in chapter 22. Very specific laws. The Ten Commandments can be seen as very general kind of propositions. And then the specificity of the laws follows. And it's religious law, it's secular law, it has to do with lots of different things. And we have in verse 12, starting with verse 9. If a man gives another an axe, an ox, or a sheep, or any other animal to guard, and it dies or is injured or is carried off, and there's no witness, an oath before the Lord shall decide between the two of them that one has not laid hands on the property of the other. With the oath, the owner must acquiesce, and no restitution shall be made. Right? So the idea is there's a missing sheep, and it died from an injury, or perhaps it was stolen. And so the shepherd now comes and he has to swear an oath, which is a serious business. The oath essentially brings divine retribution upon him if he is lying. Because of that, his swearing the oath makes it very likely that he's innocent, that the animal died not because of him, but the animal was carried off. The next clause is really the important. If the animal was stolen, if the animal was stolen, he has to make restitution because his job was to guard it. Now, finally, if it was torn by wild beasts, he should bring it as evidence, and he need not replace what was torn. In other words, if the animal was mauled, and presumably as a shepherd, he couldn't really prevent that. He's not going to fight a wolf, right? Or whatever the animal was there, but he brings the carcass, and he shows the employer, this is what happened. Here, what Jacob is saying to Laban is, I never did that. I just made up the loss myself. In other words, I have gone well beyond what I was required to do for you. And he says, scorching heat ravaged me by day, frost by night. I wasn't able to sleep. Of 20 years that I spent in your household, I served you 14 years for your daughter, 6 years for your flocks. You changed my wages time and again. Had not the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac been with me, you would have sent me away empty. Notice the reference. It's the God of Abraham, Elohei Avi, Elohei Avraham, the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and now the God of Isaac is referred to here as Achad Yitzchak, the fear of Isaac. It's not the God of Isaac, but the fear of Isaac. And it's hard not to see in this appellation the sense of the consequences of Isaac's near sacrifice on Mount Sinai, on Mount Moriah, and how that lasting mark that it left upon him. He said, you would have sent me away empty-handed, but God took notice of my plight and the toil of my hands, and he gave me judgment last night. We had this showdown. You had no idols, right? So then Laban says something really striking. The daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All that you see is mine. Any sense, right, that it was all his. It was, in fact, what Laban is saying here is exactly the proof of what Jacob just said. You would have sent me away with nothing. Well, yes, because it was all mine. What can I do now about my daughters or the children that they have borne? And now he says, let us make a pact, you and I, that there be a witness between you and me. So this again is a separation. And we've seen this several times already in Genesis, where we're denoting boundaries, right? That we have a sense here now that there will be a separation, and we're going to see it in the language. And Jacob takes a stone and set it up as a pillar. So here we're really coming, remember that Jacob, as he left, set up a pillar in the wilderness. And here, and stones are central to the whole Jacob narrative, right? Remember the stone he rolled off of the well when he met Rachel. But here, I think the idea of erecting a pillar is really telling. And he said to his kinsmen, gather stones, and they made a mound, and they had a meal. And this This is always part of these separations. And Laban gives it one name, and Jacob gives it another. Laban is calling it Yugar Sahaduta, right? And Jacob is calling it Gal Aid. Gal is a mound, and Aid is a witness. And I don't know what the Aramean means. I don't know if there's a note here. Just said this is the
The Hurt says it's the same name in Arabic in Aramaic as it is in Hebrew. It says
makes sense.
the heap of witness.
Yeah. So here you really see they are very different people, right? We have, in a sense, a separation between two nations. They may have been joined as a family, but that familial connection has now been severed. There will be no going back to Laban and to his family. Rebecca came from there. Jacob went back and got his wives, but now there's a break. So Laban says, this mount will be a witness between you and me this day. That is why it was called Gilad, and it was called Mitzpah because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are outside of each other. If you ill-treat my daughters or take other wives beside my daughters, though no one else be about, remember, God himself will be a witness. So though there'll be no one else about, meaning no one else will see it, God will see it. Right? So here he does seem to have some affection for his daughters, at least he doesn't want, or whether he's concerned about the flocks and all of that, and that no one else could have, there should be no other children to inherit it. It's unclear, but he's telling Jacob, you can't have any more wives. And he says, here, this is the mound. Here is the pillar that I have set up between you and me. This mound will be a witness. I am not to cross this mound, and you are not to cross me past this mound with hostile intent. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, their ancestral deities, judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Jacob then offered a sacrifice on the height, invited his kinsmen to partake of the meal. And after the meal, they spent the night on the height. In the morning, Jacob kissed his sons and daughters, bade them goodbye, and Laban left on his journey homeward. Jacob went on his way, and angels of God encountered him. And when he saw them, Jacob said, this is God's camp. He named it Machanaim, right? So we have these angels. There have been angels with Jacob. Angels spoke to Laban to protect him, but these are other angels. And we have this sense that, remember the image when Jacob left of the angels coming down and going up the ladder. There are angels that seem to be specific to the land of Israel. Right? And so, though there's been an angelic presence, here now, the new shift, it's the changing of the guard. The new shift has come as Jacob now begins to make his way back. I'm going to just skipping all the haftorahs now as we come to Vayishlach. We're on page 198. If you have the Eitz Chaim Humash, anything else? Just skip over the haftorahs. It's verse 4.
Rabbi, I have to sign off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any quick questions before you go? I don't want to.
No.
Okay. Hope to see you next week. Take care.
I'll be home.
All
Bye.
right. All right. God now,
I have a question.
let me do that. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's take a moment for questions. Go ahead.
Why did Rachel have to feign that she was having a period when the teraphim were already in the sack of the camel
Presumably he
in
would
the
have,
room.
I mean, he's looking through everything.
Okay.
Right. It's the way there are some ancient inscriptions of these. So it's essentially a box which you could put stuff into and then a cushion on top of the box. Right. So he's going through everything. He would have looked in it. This is how she gets away with it. Myra.
Yeah, my thought is you say Rachel took these household items, but before that, she had said to her husband that my father didn't treat us well. Wouldn't it be that she says, look, I'm gonna get back at him. I'm gonna take all that stuff with me. Couldn't that be possible?
Yeah, I think it is possible. I mean, it's it may be as presumably they have value, right? But they're portable. Right? To amplify your point, I think it's actually quite possible. They may not have religious significance, but you remember that you may know the midrash about Abraham whose father was an idol maker, and people would come into the shop, and just the midrash is suggesting these poor people had very little, and yet they would pay exorbitant prices to acquire these idols, which essentially could do nothing for them. And that's part of what led Abraham to understand that idolatry was foolish or worse. So yeah, I think it's a nice explanation, as good as any other I've read, Myra. So thank you for that. Yeah, I do see taking something for herself. Yeah, I like that. And perhaps that's part of why Laban, it seems important to him. Or maybe it's the one thing that could be identified. You can't identify the sheep or the family. He can't claim anything. But there, it's something that clearly belongs to him and not to Jacob. And so maybe that's how he's proving his case. Anyway, great. Any other comments? We will go just a little bit further. So what happens? Again, chapter 32, verse 8. Jacob sends messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, and he sends the messengers to Esau, and he says, this is what you should tell him. And the Hebrew is the Tzav Otam. He commanded them to say the following. And here it's not go tell my brother I'm coming. He's got very specific language that he wants them to repeat. Right. And this is typical of Jacob, who is always very precise in terms of what he wants and spelling it out, very lawyerly in many ways. Thus says, and notice, thus says your servant Jacob. A very telling statement, because remember what the blessing was, that the older will serve the younger. And Jacob is saying, no, I acknowledge I am the servant, right? He says, I stayed with Laban and remained until now. That, if you're wondering where I disappeared to, I was there until now. Now, there's a lovely rabbinic midrash. The Hebrew is im Lavan garti. Right? With Laban, I stayed. But the Hebrew, if you take the letters, garti, and you use gematria, each letter has a numerical value. So the gimel is 3, and the resh is 200, and the taf is 400, and the yud is 10. You add it together and you get 613. Right? So the Midrash says he's telling Esau, of all people, I was with Laban, but I kept the mitzvot. Right? It's a brilliant kind of interpretation. There's another one like this, which I love. And that is when Joseph sends for his father. He's been in Egypt. The whole business with his brother gets resolved. He reveals himself. He sends for his father. It says he sends agalot. He sends wagons. But the Midrash says that he was signaling his father with the wagons because the last thing that they studied together was a Talmud tractate, which had to do with the Egla Arufah, the calf that had not been worked in any way, that had to be sacrificed because a dead person had been found between cities. So it was his code to his father that he really was alive by reminding him of the last Talmud that they studied together, which is, of course, ridiculously anachronistic. But I love when the rabbis do this kind of thing, and here they do. So he's, at any rate, the pshat, the simple meaning here is, I was with Laban, I acquired cattle, asses, sheep, male and female slaves, and I send this message to my Lord in the hell. Again, he calls him now my Lord in the hope of gaining favor. So he says, essentially, I was with Laban. I'm extremely wealthy. I'm not going to take anything of yours, right? You don't have to. I may have gotten the birthright, and the birthright entitles me to a double inheritance. I don't need it. I've got everything, right? And I'm your servant, and you are my Lord. So you can see that he's being very careful in what he does. The language matters. So the messengers return to Jacob, and they say, we came to your brother Esau. He is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. Remember that when Jacob left home 20 years earlier, Esau was vowing to kill him. And now 400 men. Jacob is greatly frightened in his anxiety. He divides the people with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two camps, saying, if Esau comes on the one camp and attacks it, some of us may yet escape. And now Jacob addresses God and he says, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your native land and I will deal bountifully with you. I am unworthy of all the kindness that you have so steadfastly shown your servant. With my servant's staff alone, I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Deliver me. This is a remarkable change in Jacob. Jacob, the deal maker. Jacob here is acknowledging God gave him everything. He only had a staff. It's not him. It's God's blessing, right? He has more than he deserves. Jacob, who was trying to steal, amass, trick, is a different person, having come through this experience. And he asked God, now deliver me from the hand of Esau. I fear he may come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. And you see Jacob's here, his real vulnerability. It's not the stuff, his wives, his children. He didn't have anything at stake when he left. It was just him. But now he's a father and a husband, and he's afraid. So I'm going to stop here because I really want to pick up the next time with the scene where Jacob wrestles with the angel and acquires the name which becomes the name of the people Israel, that is Israel. And so we'll start there. We'll look at this just briefly once again, and that's where we'll start next time. Let me open it again. Any final questions about any of it? Just take a minute or two if anyone does. Okay, so I want to wish you a great week, and we'll continue this adventure, God willing, next week. I'll see you all then.
Thank you.
And